we are here to talk to you and redeliver a talk we've given a couple of times, but are gladly iterating on about the options that we have for audit logging with MySQL. This is third, fourth. They keep adding features, so we have to keep updating things, which is largely inconsiderate. A quick intro from us then, I guess. I'm Andrew Moore. I work for Percona. You know what they do. I've been working with MySQL for a number of years. At this stage of the conference, I think most of my blood is coffee, and I've been eating pizza for most of the week. Jeremy, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Jeremy Glick. I'm a MySQL DBA. I recently started working at ZipRecruiter. Before that, I was a consultant, and I worked at a variety of places. More recently, I was with Sears, with a company called Vivid Seats, which is similar to StubHub. It's an aftermarket for tickets, and 10X. Aside from my job, I also run the Chicago SQL Meetup group, which explores MySQL as well as other database technologies. And when I'm away from the computers, I enjoy spending time with my family, doing the sports with the kids, and we love to go out and get ice cream.
Wonderful. Okay, so I'm going too far. No. Okay, right. So our agenda, the things we'll touch on today is a bit of intro into logging and why we might want to partake in using log files. The kinds of things that can happen anyway, but what we like to catch using our audit trails. So we'll have a look at all the options that we have in the both open source and we'll have a little insight into commercial products and take it further into the world of insights and events or log management near the tail end of the talk. So initially answering the question, what is a log? The concise the concise explanation of what a log is a stream of messages that we persist in time sequence. So we can answer the question of who's done what and when. We generally talk about logs in two buckets. There's logs for us and there's logs for machines. So we're not really interested in the machines logs. They're the transaction logs, the ones that we don't cast our eyes over. But logs are the log files we refer to in this talk are human readable ones. They are plain text, and we have the ability to open them and read through so that we can garner information from inside. As we are focusing on audit logs, auditing as an action is the desire to gather an audit trail. So we want to know precisely what's happened, by who, and when it occurred. So we aim to capture this sequence of events and persist them somewhere. So auditing is not strictly coupled with databases at all. We see audits in all sorts of things. Our operating systems have audit logs as well. But it's very useful to leverage audit logs to answer various questions. Beyond the security and compliance elements, we can also use audit logs to discover trends in our data and our access, and we're able to make decisions based on the information inside. So one of the side effects of having an audit trail is troubleshooting and debugging. Some of the audit logs off-the-shelf solutions we'll look at include some useful information about states of queries coming into our server, so we can troubleshoot and debug.
So probably the most common people that get started with audit logging is for regulatory compliance. These are some of the most common regulatory compliance that you'll see out there. SOX, which is Sarbanes-Oxley, it's the result of some famous, Sarbanes-Oxley, yeah. It's the Investor Protection Act of 2002. It's in wake of corporate scandals that occurred in the early 2000s. And HIPAA with regards to healthcare, the healthcare industry and in healthcare data. PCI DSS, which refers to the credit card industry, and IAD, that would refer to internal audit division if you work for, say, a private company that may not have they may not be regulated by the government, but they wish to do their own compliance, that would fall under that category. Even if you are not forced with regulatory compliance, you may want to use audit logging for some obvious reasons. You don't have to look very far to see some of the breaches that have happened in recent history. If you look at some of these headlines here, Yahoo is probably the biggest one out there, over 1 billion accounts hacked. And aside from damaging the reputation of Yahoo, it's also probably devalued their company. Verizon announced that they were willing to pay much less after the breach than what had been talked about before the breach. LinkedIn and Friend Finder are a couple other cases that were out in the news. How many of you have ever had, if you're a DBA or just if you work with a database, have had something just unusual happen, maybe some data changed, and you needed to find out what happened? And what's your first action? Do you start messaging some of your colleagues, make some phone calls, or do you have an easy way to get on there and find out what exactly happened? And I know I've had a situation where nobody could tell me what changed some data in a table, and I start scanning through the bin logs, which is not fun to do, especially if you have millions of transactions to go through. Having an audit log definitely makes that job a lot easier. It also holds users accountable, because if you have audit log in place, people know about it, and they're going to behave differently, especially on production systems. Before 5.5, which is when the Audit API came into place, these are some of the methods we were forced to use for audit logging. Triggers, writing to an audit table, modification timestamps, on update or create time. Then we've got the standard MySQL logs, none of which are very specific to audit logging. They're all, the slow log, it'll only run on a query that's slow, or whatever your threshold is set to. Or the general log, it's very verbose. It's going to fill up fast. It's not always ideal to use that. And then you've got your bin logs, which, as Andy discussed, that's more of a machine log. You have to run it through MySQL bin log to be able to get human-readable format. And even then, it's lacking some information. Net Connect was another method that I personally used at one point in time to log connections. You could pass a function to that. Each time a user would log in, it would write their username and a timestamp to a table. That would not run if a super user connected, and it's just not a very good solution overall. It's lacking a lot of ways. And lastly, binary hooking, which we'll talk about in a little bit. That's another method to do the logging before the Audit API was in place. 5.5 brought with it the Audit API, and this provided a lot more options for DBAs and people that needed to audit log. It created an interface that developers could use to write these audit plugins. Gave access to messages written to the general log, the error log, as well as results that are sent to the client. And here's a few of the main plugins we'll talk about today. These are probably the most popular ones out there. We've got McAfee, which has probably been around the longest, MariaDB, Percona, and we'll talk a little bit about MySQL's enterprise offerings. And we'll touch a little bit on Amazon's AWS. They have a couple audit solutions that you can use with them. Before we get into each specific plugin, I'm just going to go quickly over how to do the installation. First, it's a plugin, so you need to make sure that the plugin is in the plugin directory. There's a variable you can check on, the plugin dir, and that'll show you where the plugins go, and you can make sure it's in there. Some MySQL distributions will come with a plugin already there for audit logging. Others, you'll have to put it there. So just make sure it's there. And then you have two methods to the installation. You can either run install plugin from the MySQL command line, or you can load it from the config with the plugin load. If you do the install plugin, it's going to write it to there's a plugins system table to write that there, and then that'll get called when MySQL starts up. However, if you start with skip grants, it will not load that plugin, so then it's not loading at that point in time. If you use the configuration option, it will load no matter what. And it's also, I prefer the second option here, because during testing, I've had times where a plugin just wouldn't start up for me, and it's much easier to disable it if you just can comment it out in the config and then start up MySQL. Once you've installed, you can verify your install. You just need to show plugins or select plugins, and you should see the plugin there. There's also likely some status variables that you can see. And one of the main configuration options, there's several to consider, but this is one of the ones to consider when you're first installing, is each of these plugins have an option to force that plugin to remain turned on. If these are not enabled, then somebody can log in and uninstall the plugin. There used to even be a bug where unprivileged users could install the plugins. So it would remain active, but if somebody tries to uninstall it, it depends what the default value is. But if this was, like, let's say that the uninstall plugin was on, it would allow somebody to go in, disable the plugin, and then maybe drop a table or do something crazy and then you don't have an audit trail anymore. But if it's enabled, when somebody logs in, they can't uninstall it. First one we'll talk about is McAfee's audit plugin. This one's been around the longest. It's, like I said, it's open source. It works with MySQL, MariaDB, Percona server. Of the open source plugins we'll talk about, this has the most powerful filtering options. It puts out in a JSON log format, and it's compatible with Syslog NG, and they have great community support. If you go out to their GitHub page, you'll see that they're very responsive to tickets, and they have decent documentation for as small as the project is. They make things pretty simple. When I was testing, it was very easy for me to get this up and running. We're going to talk about binary hooking just briefly. This is probably the biggest difference of this plugin versus the others we'll talk about. It doesn't rely on the audit API for most of what it does. Some of the benefits of that is it supported earlier versions. That may not be as important these days, but back when I first had to do audit logging, we were running some 5.1 servers, and this was the one we went with because of that. They're also not limited by anything that the API is lacking. For example, some of that filtering that may not have been available with the earlier APIs, they were able to do that. The downside of the binary hooking is it requires setting offsets, and that's because the binary hooking it allows McAfee it allows it to intercept function calls and messages at runtime within MySQL. And these offsets can vary between version and distribution of MySQL. If you're running a version that has pre-configured offsets, then this plugin will work right out of the box. But if you start up the plugin and it doesn't work, you'll get an error message, and then you may have to generate these offsets yourself. So this is the Now, this is an added step they have to do. It may require extra debugging or extra testing, and that's each time you install it or if you do an upgrade. So that's the downside to the binary hooking. These offsets, what they do is they allow access to those internal structures within MySQL. And as I said, it's required so they can have a single binary that's compatible with multiple versions and distributions of MySQL. This is an example of an error you would see if you started up McAfee with incompatible offsets. You'll get an error message like this, at which time the documentation will tell you you have a couple options. One, you can tell it to not validate the checksums. And in that case, if you have let's say that you have offsets for a compatible version but not a distribution, it may start working at that point, then you're good to go. If it's still not compatible, you will see another error message. And that's where you're going to use a script that McAfee offers to generate those offsets yourself. It's actually pretty easy to run. It's just a shell script. You pass the path to MySQL to it. The catch is MySQL has to be compiled with debugging symbols. If it's not, then you've got to take another route. If you're running Percona server, which is not compiled with debugging symbols, they happen to have a separate package with debugging symbols. You would install that, and then you'd pass the path to MySQL debug. If you're still not able to do it, if you're running, I think Ubuntu has, I think their distribution compiles without the debugging symbols. In that case, you either have to compile yourself with debugging symbols or find a different package to download. Once you've got those offsets, it's pretty easy. You just put it like that in your configuration file and start up, and hopefully you don't get an error message. As I said, McAfee, of the open source options, they have some of the most powerful filtering. You can filter on the commands. If, for instance, you just want to audit the updates, you can filter on objects. Maybe you have certain tables that contain sensitive information. You can select just to filter on those. And you can do it on users as well. This may be because you're only required to do it for certain users or objects. It may also be for performance reasons, because if performance testing, you'll see that the more things you're logging, the more it's going to affect performance. If you're on a busy server, you might not even have a choice. You might not be able to log everything, depending on what resources you have. Okay. And this is another performance option you have. They have a variable called audit JSON sync. And by setting this, you're telling it how often you want it to sync to disk. And you can say for, like, if I set the value to 20, for every writes, then it would sync to disk. This can help with performance. Doing benchmarking, I did see I could change performance by tuning this. But you have a chance of losing some events if the server crashes before it syncs. Next, this is MariaDB's audit plugin. This one is, it uses the API. So it's a little more of a standard audit plugin. MariaDB, when they created their plugin, they expanded the API. The original API from MySQL was lacking a couple things they wanted. For instance, they wanted to be able to report on what table was being accessed when a view was called, and they extended the API for that reason. They output to a CSV, and they're compatible with Syslog. If you remember, McAfee was Syslog NG. And they also have some availability on RDS. And I'll talk about that in a little bit also. 6 different types of log records you can do. I'm not going to this is documented. I won't go through it all just because that'd be like reading the documentation. But you can record different types of events, and these will create log entries. And there's the variable right down here where that's how you would set it. It's just comma-separated list of what you want to log. As far as filtering, you can filter on users with MariaDB. Again, that's handy if certain users don't need to be logged. Maybe you're maybe you don't want to log the application user, but you want to log all the other users that have access. This is how you enable Syslog or file output. And they have some specific Syslog variables, so it is built to work with Syslog. As I said, MariaDB will work with Amazon's RDS, MariaDB, and MySQL instances. There's documentation on how to install it. And not sure if you've heard of Aurora, but Aurora is Amazon's like a high performance MySQL compatible database, and they have something called advanced audit logging with that, which if you look at the features, you'll see it's very similar to MariaDB's. You'll see similar variables you can set. Even the output to the log is somewhat similar. But they have changed how it works under the hood. It's much higher performance. It has a latch-free queue where the events are sent, and then it does multi-threaded writes to multiple files in parallel. However, when you look at the logs, they're going to be out of order because it's doing these parallel writes. They give you a field that you can sort by when you select from these logs. But it's pretty neat. If you look at their benchmarks, they show huge performance gains over just standard MariaDB audit plugin. I mean, I'm talking like 15 times better performance. That's their benchmark. So, take it with a grain of salt. But I would, if you're using Aurora, it's something to look into.
No, I think it's all just it's files, or there are alternatives. McAfee was able to write out to a socket, so you could pipe that across the network if you need to. But Syslog is the main alternative, or Syslog-like structure. So that's kind of what we're resigned to at the moment.
We're going to talk a little later about pulling into Elasticsearch and some other things like that, which could be easier access.
Cool. So as you might expect, Percona has a stakehold in the audit plugin market. Extremely similar in terms of the results you get with the other previously mentioned products. Slight variations. Simply installed again. It's an API-based plugin. Installation through config file, or at runtime, or through this MySQL CLI. It's shipped with the server, compatible from 5.5. Can't recall the minor 3.7, I think. So every issue of MySQL Percona server has been since then. The library is available. There's no extra download, so that kind of makes things a little bit more convenient than having to elect a version such as you do have to with McAfee. So there's little compatibility teething problems there. It's relatively simple to get up and running. There's only a handful of important variables if you want to log directly out to a file. I like to turn it on, turn it up to 11, and log out in JSON format. It's my preference. It's a little clearer than the other options of XML and CSV. And then taking care of some of the housekeeping, we have some options here for rotating the files as they grow. So you can keep a cap on what's on your file system. Again, like Jeremy said, it's probably a bit of a waste of time going through all the options, but there are others to alter the output and whatnot. There came a feature request, 12 months ago or so, that we wanted to be able to reduce what we logged, or more better phrase, to focus on what goes out into the log file. We talked about auditing, and I think it's fair to say that in many cases, auditing can be quite a full-on action. If to gather every single event that's gone on in a system can get quite expensive, especially at a high QPS. So we can be a bit more focused here. We can blacklist or whitelist accounts, even the types of commands we want to gather access to, or the databases at a schema level. We can say, okay, well, include this one or exclude these ones, and then we can reduce the amount of logging that goes on the system, and the I/O penalty that may incur. Just for brevity, I wildcarded the options, but get onto the documentation if you wanted to find out exactly what the form is. With the filtering, you pick include or exclude. You can't use both, so you need to elect which one to use. We found a bug recently with including accounts. Percona server doesn't like, this is in 5.6 only, but Percona server doesn't like to deal with IP addresses right now. I think there's an issue with the regex. 5.7 is unaffected, but one to watch out for if that's a tool of your choice. This is a performance-related option, and this governs the lossiness at which you can log. It helps us when we have a busy system, or if we have the requirements to be very stringent and strong with our logging consistency. So the idea is, from top to bottom, we get stronger in terms of less likely to lose log lines, log events, but at a penalty, because we're calling many more fsyncs as we log out to through the buffer out into the file itself. Like the others, Percona server wants to keep compatibility with Syslog, so there's an option, if that's how you're inclined, to throw your events into Syslog as well and meet everything in the middle. But I tend to just, as I said, log out to the files. Percona has a bit of an issue with bringing these features to market. We've witnessed McAfee, I guess, because of its maturity, lead in terms of features. Many of the needed to have and nice to haves were there by the time we'd started checking this out. MariaDB, they were on the right course. Percona were somewhat mirroring some of the functionality available in MySQL's enterprise plugin, and the innovation coming from Oracle was something that Percona were trying to keep up with. There has been a gap growing in the recent iterations. Just specific to Percona, in terms of Percona's database software, a similar thing was done for MongoDB. So if you need auditing with Mongo, you can use auditing with MongoDB. Incidentally, that's our Mongo captain. Every question starts with, what about Mongo? So, on to MySQL Enterprise plugin. Apart from one obvious member of the audience, anyone here using enterprise licensing with their MySQL? A little bit? Okay, cool. Well, I mean, this is entirely in your interest then. So, MySQL Oracle version of the Enterprise Audit plugin is a commercial extension. So, whilst you don't just pay for the audit plugin, you get all of the services and the bells and whistles that comes with the subscription. But then you're licensed to use it. So, again, we are talking about a audit coupled with its API. So, we feel comfortable that it's doing the right thing. I think sometimes folks look at the McAfee solution and they're a little bit dubious about how it can do its magic. What we have with Oracle's plugin is that the logs are formatted with XML. There's two different flavors of this. Historic compatibility with other products is the reason for that. The Oracle Audit Vault, which is, for use of a better term, an SIEM, I think, beyond the paywall I've ever seen. So I have no experience with it, but that's its intention. So you can move your logs and events into this security tool and allow you good governance over the data that comes in from them. Now, MySQL made some changes. 5.7.15, I think, 13 maybe. Introduced some new features, and whilst we were rebooting our slides, we came across a warning in the documentation, and I don't think it's unique to MySQL, because with the activation of a plugin that's going to subscribe to the Audit API, it's likely that you're going to encounter different code paths. So the warning here is that even if you install it and don't activate it, you're likely to be traversing these code paths. See for yourself. We've linked at the bottom. Will be in the slides. Installation's slightly different as well. It's kind of wrapped because there's some peripheral objects now that we need for a new kind of logging. Well, not particularly a new kind of logging, a new way to administer the audit plugin. So we have now a script that ships with the server, the enterprise binaries, and this SQL file, once imported, will create a series of UDFs and tables. So we have a couple of tables in the MySQL schema now that are, did I record them? Possibly. Audit log filter, audit log user. These tables are the persisted settings for your filtering, and you administer the filtering, I get this all the way wrong way around, through these new UDFs. Now, we didn't envisage having many enterprise users in the room, and it was such a late find. We don't really have too many slides on its usage. But fundamentally, we have new filtering capabilities, and we manipulate their settings through using the UDF calls. Incidentally, you can operate in legacy mode because the plugin requires the plugin in the filtering, new filtering functionality detects the tables in the UDF. So if it doesn't find them, you fall back to a structure very similar to how Percona continues with their audit plugins, the options available. So we can filter on user accounts, event audit class and subclass, and we can even be a bit more granular based on the contents of the SQL statements that are being executed. A curious one that I detected as well whilst researching is that these new tables are using the MyISAM storage engine, which is kind of counterintuitive to what Oracle are trying to do with all the MyISAM and making data dictionaries and FRMs disappear. So it was a bizarre design decision that we thought about. But having discussed with Morgan Tocker why this might have been, he suggested that there's potential that the loading order of the server when it comes up right now with all these constructs intact means that the plugin could be loaded before MariaDB and therefore unable to detect the tables. So maybe you can comment on the real.
That's exactly the case. So the plugin is 5.6 plus.
Mm-hmm.
In 5.6, MariaDB installed it together with the rest of the plugin, so that's taking like.
Mm-hmm.
And we need these things of initialization.
Yeah. Sure. So there's method to the madness, and I would assume that future implementations will move away. Okay. Cool. Wonderful. So for the benefits of the enterprise subscribers, definitely worth investigating, and not to forget that by subscribing to enterprise licensing, you'll have full support of it as well. So it's certainly a wise choice. The audit log strategy, again, I think it was an implementation in the Oracle plugin before it became anything to do with Percona. So same rules apply as the previous mention of this set of options. And then I guess for offline consumption, we thought it might be a nice little rundown of some of the things you can expect from the open source off the shelf, because they're very easy to get hold of and test with before you commit to putting this into production. So considering we have the potential to capture a vast amount of data in a very short space of time, and of course our compliance requirements, the need to investigate the logs that we do capture, it's, I think, responsible to ensure that you're using the data that's there. Gathering all this data is not without its own penalty, but of course there's an enriching amount of information in them as well. So we can answer all kinds of questions that we may not have to kind of do for compliance reasons, but who's had to inherit a server and work out whether a user still logs in, or if a table's still used, can we drop it? There's many times in my career that I've been on a server, and even the folks that had owned the data set, they couldn't tell me whether or not this large table that looks static is accessed for reports, for anything that may be even monthly jobs, yearly reports, and this is the kind of insight you can get from something like an audit log. So with vast amount of data, it requires handling. I'm not sure there's too many people nowadays operating off a single instance. So you kind of have the opportunity for different data sets hitting your audit plugin or your audit log. So it's not a simple task to get through the information that we do have. So there is the requirement to centralize the data in similar intentions that Oracle and the Audit Vault has, to centralize it and be able to analyze. So we have our audit plugin to generate this data. We record the data to our Syslog or our local file system, and then we might need to move that data somewhere. So either collect all the files together and move them with rsync or something, or something a little bit more inventive. So scripts that can take your data and push it to the cloud. And then we need somewhere to store it, and hopefully that will enable us to analyze. And if we have any causes for retaining the data past a small field of interest, so many organizations have the requirements to retain information for a certain amount of years. So moving this data away from our production file systems is probably in our best interest anyway. So there are some options. We've got commercial and open source options. These are all, aside from the last option, which is a category of product, but the four options above are just examples of log management or centralization options that you can leverage in the cloud. So Splunk is probably a very popular household name by now. It's a mature product, but it's very expensive as your data set grows. But depending on your use case, it might make sense to host this on someone else's infrastructure. Honeycomb is a very new software as a service product that I think we'll probably hear a lot more about in the future, set to consume events and logs and enable you to correlate and analyze. Logly and some others are essentially Elastic Stack in the cloud. And then we have the opportunity to connect with our security incident event management systems that we may already be running. So that there is certainly opportunity there. So the open source option of Elastic Stack is where we really spent our time with any form of log analysis. And this is a new name for what we used to refer to as the Elk Stack. So Elastic Stack is a multi-component group of open source tools that allow us to do this, the traversal of record, ship, store, analyze, and archive through the two lower elements, so beats and logstash, the B and the L. That provides us with the shipping and enriching, so we can move our events from our log files. We can analyze the events coming through, make some decisions, change, mutate, enrich the data in that tier, and then we can persist it in Elasticsearch, which, if it's a new term to you, is a search and analytics product that is powerful with full text search. So fundamentally, we're moving strings of text from a log file into a platform that has its strength in manipulating strings and text. So that gives us the opportunity to instantly, maybe near real time, manipulate the logs or search the logs. So if we're looking for some root cause analysis on issues, we can aggregate across the data. So we can, for example, see how many queries were active in the server at certain points in time. Answer questions as well about our workload, like how many writes do we see in a day? How many updates do we see in a day? How many updates on certain tables do we see during the course of a period of time? And the final element of the Elastic Stack is Kibana, which is a front-end GUI tool, a visualization tool. So that will allow us to actually run ad hoc queries across the data set, transform that data into visuals, so pie charts, bar charts, graphs, tables, anything really that you would envisage slicing and dicing large sets of data. It's for us, it was very cheap and simple to get up and running. They are very user-friendly tools, and for the sake of being able to consume the various audit log formats that we'd thrown at it, it was simple for us to run this on our laptops. It's an enterprise scale tooling, so you can cluster beyond a few machines and consume more than just your MySQL audit logs. So it could be a tool for many different flavors of work as you manage your logs. So typically, we might have a topology similar to this. Doesn't have to be on different hardware, just for the sake of clarity. So our database instances are writing out our logs. We can parse slow logs, we can parse error logs, as well as the audits, and push them into the pipeline via Logstash and Beats into our Elasticsearch servers, and then utilize Kibana to visualize. I've been toying with this stack for a little while now, and built some easy-to-use Docker images. So if you wanted to give that a try, my GitHub account has all the stuff you need to get started with. There is a Docker image that has all three components of the Elk stack, so Logstash, Elasticsearch, and Kibana, and it allows you to it publishes the Kibana port, so you can start it up, feed it a location for log files, and then it will accept the log files and allow you to visualize. So it's great for testing. It's not for production scale, of course, but it's you can get your hands dirty. And as well as that, on my Docker Hub page as well, there is an image there that contains pre-installed versions of all the latest audit plugins as well. So you can get a Percona server with Percona plugin, an Oracle MySQL server with McAfee on and MariaDB with MariaDB. So I think the advice is mostly give it a try. It really brings a new dimension to just capturing the audit log data. Makes it more useful than just throwing it into a security incident event manager. And yeah, it's I know data. It's a geek's dream to get playing with these kinds of things anyway. We had planned to do a little bit of more visual stuff with Kibana. I hold my hands up. I was trying to do things this morning and deleted all my efforts from the Elasticsearch index, so there's really nothing to see, which is a travesty. But it's really something that I think I would recommend. I think last time I'd looked, there was a tool within Oracle's utilities that was allowing you to grep through the XML output of the log files, which would be compatible with both Percona and the Oracle versions. Yeah.
I think we used to have a slide for this and it got missed somehow. But one thing that's important to keep in mind is that these audit logs are not encrypted by default. So these need to be put somewhere secure, and especially when you're looking at the insights and things like this. Just keep in mind, especially you have PII, you got to be careful with that. So just best practice. Keep that in mind. Well, like I said, we've done benchmarks in the past with various plugins. We haven't compared all three together, but we've done them individually. And there's tools like Sysbench or was it MySQL Slap that make it pretty easy to throw a load at it. Or you can replay some of your own queries, then just adjust the variables to try to get better performance. But it's not that difficult to do, but like I said, we've done it individually, but we've never compared all of these against one another. Sorry? Oh.
Well, I mean, it's subjective to the workload, right? We've got some customers that are running with the Percona version in production, and they don't see a drop in QPS that concerned them at all. It's another log file. It's more flushing to a device. So, I mean, I think in terms of best practices, moving this away from the data directory, it's sequential I/O. It's buffered sequential I/O. So, it shouldn't be too much of a problem until you really turn on the strong flushing with some of the modes that we have in place. So, it's the one thing that I guess is not always in the forefront of your mind is you can turn this on and you can turn it off. So if you find that it is achieving an overhead you can't withstand, all of the plugins have a dynamic variable for you to just stop logging. So if the I/O is a penalty, you stop logging. Again, they were synthetic loads that we ran, so they're not representative of anything except for turning it on and allowing Sysbench to just hammer a server. I think I'd seen some mediocre drop in QPS, like from 30,000 down to like 29. It can be abhorrent, but it wasn't like turning on a slow log at full verbosity. It was certainly more forgiving than that, and I think that's why this was made available. I think it's certainly a use case for that. Cool. So we're about a minute left for any questions, comments, songs, jokes.
Good question. In these Docker images, do you actually have some wireless like some analysis that things go into the software?
Yeah, the versions that were used on the Docker version was Kibana, I think 3 or Kibana 4. It was prior to being able to export dashboards. The work that's gone into doing some of the planning here, dusting off the machines for testing, it's all still in my lab, so I can push this down push this up to Docker Hub. It'd be pretty simple, but yeah, I mean, it's we did have a full dashboard of various touch points that we thought would be interesting. I'll throw it up in a Percona blog, and then maybe you'll see it that way. Cool. All right. Well, thank you very much, everyone.